Ladies and gentlemen, we have experts, a panel of experts, of medical specialists who will now share with us some of their knowledge and expertise, and they will have a few moments each to tell you about their connection to Duchenne and their role. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to stage Winthrop Professor Nigel Laing, Professor Steve Wilton and Associate Professor Phillipa Lamont. It's like the hot seat. Fantastic. Good to have you here again this year. Put your hands together for our guests, ladies and gentlemen, who are going to explain just a little bit of where we're at with Duchenne. Professor Laing obtained both his Bachelor of Science in Pharmacology and a PhD in Physiology from the University of Edinburgh before moving to UWA in 1981. His PhD and early career research was as a developmental neurobiologist. He retrained in molecular genetics at Duke University, North Carolina. On returning to WA in 1988, Professor Laing was tasked with developing molecular neurogenetic research and molecular neurogenetic diagnostics at the Australian Neuromuscular Research Institute and the Royal Perth Hospital, respectively. His research interests lie in identification of disease genes for genetic muscle and neurological disorders and developing treatments for genetic muscle diseases. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please make welcome Winthrop Professor Nigel Laing.
So as Tim said, I have two roles in life in Western Australia. One is in research and one is in molecular diagnostics. In our research lab, we concentrate on finding human disease genes, that is, the genes which, when mutated, cause genetic conditions. In our diagnostic lab in Path West, we provide a service for more neurogenetic disorders than any other diagnostic lab in Australia. I got into this business by going to work at Duke University, North Carolina for 1 year between 87 and 88. Next month, July 2013, will be the 26th anniversary of the sequencing of the complete coding region of the Duchenne muscular dystrophy gene. The week that was published by Lou Kunkel and his then dynamic young team in Harvard was the week I arrived at Duke. Basically, for us in human genetics, it's been non-stop ever since. And this last period has been the golden age of human genetics, including the sequencing of the human genome. One of the first jobs I had to do at Duke was to work with a Pakistani family that had Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The Pakistani family was still living in Pakistan. The reason we analyzed that family at Duke was because the guy I worked with, Tipu Sadiq, was from Pakistan himself. The family consisted of 2 sons with Duchenne and 4 sisters. What we did was we found the mutation in the boys, and we showed that 3 out of the 4 sisters were not carriers of the disease. Tipu received a thank you letter from the father in Pakistan, and the thank you letter said, "Thank you so much for showing that 3 of my daughters are not carriers of Duchenne. They can now be married." Duchenne dystrophy means different things in different cultures. Here in Western Australia, one of the first things we did was we rescued a boy by finding, just at the last minute, this unborn boy, we found a mutation in his family and showed that he wasn't carrying the mutation. His family's nickname for him was Lucky. One of the things that we do in the diagnostic lab, as I said, is we diagnose Duchenne. And basically, I'm fed up diagnosing boys with Duchenne. We diagnose the boys too late and too often. The average age at which we diagnose the boys with Duchenne is around about 5, sometimes as late as 8. When that happens, the boys have missed out on the best standards of care possible, standards of care that Phillipa will be talking about, and it's also too late for the new, exciting, amazing therapies that Steve is developing. we need to diagnose the boys early. The only way to do that successfully is to perform some form of population screening, and I, with one of our hostesses, Claire Bailey, and the lady next door to her, Liz Gilhood, are looking into that with the newborn screening laboratory in New South Wales. The other thing that I can see happening in the future as the new genetic technologies get better and better is we will be having in the future carrier screening. Carrier screening not only for Duchenne but other recessive genetic disorders, where we find the carriers of these diseases before they find out they're carriers by having affected children. We've reached a point next month, 26 years on from that original discovery, where maybe we hope to get there sooner. But thanks to Steve and others, that goal is finally being reached. And we are looking forward to a better future for boys and families with Duchenne. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Professor Nigel Laing. Professor Steve Wilton, who joined the Australian Neuromuscular Research Institute at UWA in 1991 and is now head of the Molecular Genetic Therapy Group and Director of Translational Research and Development. Initially involved in the development of molecular diagnostic tests for many neuromuscular disorders, the primary research focus of his group is developing and extending the use of antisense... I don't even know how to say this. What is it? Oligo, is it? Thank you. To induce specific exon skipping. I was going well. I was feeling very good about myself for a moment. As a therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy and other diseases. This proves effective for DMD. The splice intervention approach could be applied to many other genetic and acquired conditions. He is the president of the Australian Gene Therapy Society, a member of the Executive Committee of the World Muscle Society. Ladies and gentlemen, to explain more, would you please make welcome Professor Steve Wilton.
Thank you, Tim. There's a couple of things I have to change with the intro like that. I'm no longer at University of Western Australia. I've taken up a foundation chair in molecular therapy at Murdoch University. I'm no longer the Director of Translational Research at the ANRI. I'm the actual Director of the ANRI, so it's a bit of a millstone. No. What I wanted to do was talk about the therapy that Nigel was mentioning. When I joined the Australian Neuromuscular Research Institute in '91, it was involved in developing diagnostic tests. And while we were actually had a couple of rush cases, I mean, I think one of the at-risk mothers was 7 weeks pregnant. We had to try and find the mutation. So this was really pushing the techniques. These days you could do these techniques very quickly. But when I was doing this diagnostic test, we came across some unusual features, and that led me to a new type of therapy. It's called exon skipping, where there's a bad part of the gene, and we can use our antisense oligonucleotides. Yep. Actually, the full name now is phosphorodiamidate morpholino oligomer, which is even more horrible. But these are little genetic band-aids, and they can stick to the bad part of the gene message and skip it over. So what happens in Duchenne is there's a defect in the message that stops the instructions dead, and the gene product is missing. There's a milder form of dystrophin mutations called Becker muscular dystrophy. And in some cases in Becker muscular dystrophy, the person might be diagnosed in their 60s. It's very, very mild. So the concept of the treatment that is developed in Perth, it's in clinical trials at the moment, I'll talk about that in a second, is to change a Duchenne boy into making a Becker-like protein to reduce the severity. Now, as I said, with support from the community, this is the support from the Muscular Dystrophy Association of Western Australia, the NIH, the NHMRC to some point. We've been able to develop these compounds, and they're now in clinical trials. Now, when I spoke to you last year, the trials had already been going for about sort of 24 weeks. And one of the tests you can do is to see how far a boy can walk. This is a very simple, non-invasive test. It's called the 6-minute walk. It's not absolute, but it gives you a pretty good indication, because the boys, as the muscle disease progresses, they get weaker, they can't walk as far. So in 6 minutes, you can just see how far a boy is walking in 6 minutes. And then a couple of months later, you check to see how far he can walk. And as the disease gets worse, you'll find that he might be able to walk 400 metres one time. The next time it might be sort of 370. The next time you test him, it's 340. So there's a downward progression in the 6-minute walk test. Now, at the clinical trial point 1 year ago, all the boys that were receiving the drug were stable. They were still walking the same distance. It started about 400 metres. The boys that were receiving a placebo, that's a saline, just a dummy drug that's not going to work, they progressed and they lost the ability to walk about 40 metres. But the boys that were receiving the drug, there were other tests done, and it showed that this drug was restoring expression. The missing protein was being made. They were making the Becker protein. So what has happened is that all the boys started to receive the drug. It was considered unethical to withhold it from the boys on the placebo. So I'm delighted to say that in the following year, the boys that are on that trial are still walking 400 metres. This is... The trouble is it's only a small number of boys. It's only about 10 boys in the trial. But in all cases, even the boys that were receiving the drug later, the delayed placebo group, they have stabilised. They stopped walking. Well, they went down to about sort of 350 metres, and they've stabilised for the last year at that level. So as Nigel was saying, we have to have the early diagnosis. We have to start this treatment as soon as possible. So this is sort of the first part of it. These drugs, though, they're still highly experimental. There's issues with production. Because it is such a novel compound, not many people can make, there's only a few companies in the world that can make this type of drug. It's very specialised. It's going to be very expensive. But what we're hoping is that this is going to be proof of concept that this type of therapy is going to work. And we can stabilise the boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And the thing is, if we can treat them, diagnose them and start treatment as early as possible, we should preserve a lot of the muscle function and keep the boys in as good shape as possible. We also are planning on extending this to other diseases and having a platform therapy. And this is what the vision at Murdoch is about. We're looking at expanding this to essentially becoming a personalised medicine. So at the Centre of Comparative Genomics, we're looking at much more than Duchenne. Duchenne is the flagship. This is the proof of concept. It started in Perth. We want to sort of push this and promote it as far as we can. And these trials are going to be ongoing. They're unprecedented. There's no other drug that I'm aware of that has come close to showing such a delaying the progression of the disease. And with compounds being obtained, I'm going across to the States next week. Hope to source this compound. We can start trials in Perth. This is something that we have to do, and we're going to make it work with your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Steve Wilton. Got to get on to my script writer. Wikipedia. And I normally write my stuff when I'm reading AutoCue. It's very easy to do. But tonight I'm working with this information provided with me. But Steve, all the very best wherever you are working at the moment. Whatever board you're on, you are a very smart man. I really do. Very good. Very good. I'm just a dumb sports guy. But our next guest, Associate Professor Phillipa Lamont, completed her primary medical degree at UWA and then trained in paediatric neurology in Perth and later Sydney. She completed a PhD at Sydney University, followed by a postdoctoral fellowship at Great Ormond St Hospital for Children in London and the Hospital for Neurology at Queen's Square. It was there that she was exposed to the newly emerging field of neurogenetics. Upon returning to Perth, she trained in adult neurology and established the neurogenetic unit at Royal Perth. She's also a neurologist at Princess Margaret Hospital, and together with Dr. Peter Rowe runs the PMH Neuromuscular Clinic, and she has approved every word I've just said. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please make welcome the Associate Professor Phillipa Lamont.
Thanks very much. Don't worry, I can't say the oligo thingy whatever's anyway. I just always get mixed up as well. Yeah. So we've heard all about the scientific advances, and they're incredibly exciting. It's just so exciting. But what about now? What about now? I'm at the coalface. I'm very, very lucky because trained in both paediatric and adult neurology, I can see the boys as they are diagnosed all the way through into adulthood. And so I'm in a very privileged position. I'm at the coalface. I see these incredibly brave boys, but moreover, I also see their incredibly brave parents. From the moment when they are completely shattered with this news, and I see them come through it, I see them come through the shock, the horror, they go through the steps of grief, and then they come out the other end. Well, not all of them, but most of them. And two of the most magnificent ones who've come out the other end are here today. People who make a huge difference and will go on making a difference. So what's this mean? I think Pam has actually alluded to a lot of this. Over the last 20 years, I should take a step back. It doesn't only affect the muscles of the arms and legs, it also affects their breathing muscles, their heart muscle. Over the last 20 years, in fact, the cardiologists and the respiratory doctors have got a bit of a jump on us. They've actually started very good supportive measures for these boys' lungs, for their hearts, and so that's taken their life survival from teens through to 20s and 30s now. No one expects these boys to die in their teens. So now I sit down with these boys, and rather than saying, oh, getting to the end of school, oh, you know, what's going I now say to all of them, what are you going to do now? They're all going to go off to, and they're smart boys, they go off and they do university, they go into TAFE and they do computer degrees. It's a completely new ball game. So now, of course, we are looking at different challenges. How do we protect things like their bone health? We had a young fellow die a year and a half ago because he had very brittle bones because he'd been on steroid therapy, which helps them to stay on their feet longer. So we have different things that we have to think about now. We have to think about their bone health. We have to think about their skin. We have to think about many different things. We have to think about the side effects that come from steroids, such as cataracts and so on, and high pressure on the brain and things like that. So what else do we have to think about? What we have to think about is the standard of living that these boys have. And I think that chair is amazing. For a boy to be sitting down from the age of usually between 10 and 12 and looking up at everybody all the time is embarrassing and it's demeaning. And for them to be able to get up and to be able to use, and also to have a chair that they can use for sport. And also, in fact, I don't want to tell them this, but it's actually really good for their bone health too, because they're putting their muscle, their mass through their bones. So things like that chair, things like amazing experiences like driving, speed cars, going sailing, doing things that every normal boy should aspire to. These are the things that we have to actually acknowledge as well. Research, yes, incredibly important, but also the here, the now, the experience of these boys. Not everyone lives to 80, but what you got should be worthwhile and should be good. And I think that's what we're really focusing on as well tonight. Thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you agree our three speakers kept it short, kept it simple, but effective, and they are masters in their field. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for our three medical experts, Winthrop, Professor Nigel Laing, Professor Steve Wilton, and Associate Professor Phillipa Lamont. Thank you. Thank you very much.